My name is Anna Delaney. I'm 34 years old, a certified fraud examiner, and the founder of Sterling Ledger Advisory, a forensic accounting firm in Denver that closed out last year with $2.3 million in revenue. 9 years ago, my own family called me a traitor and disowned me over a single signature I refused to give. Disowned. And yet, by the time the story ends, I was the one sitting across a courtroom table holding the only document that actually mattered. 6 weeks before that hearing, I still didn't know my Uncle Richard had stood in front of a judge and claimed my grandfather wanted him as legal guardian. I didn't know a woman in a white coat was about to open a laptop and end his entire case in 11 seconds. I didn't know any of it yet. But I remember exactly what my Aunt Carol said to me the night everything fell apart, back in December of 2015, her voice flat under the kitchen light. You were never really one of us, Anna. Not the way Cole is. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I read every single comment. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, hit subscribe, because this story does not end where you think it does. Let me take you back to where this actually started, a kitchen in Millbrook Falls, Ohio, in July of 2008. I was 16. My father, David, had died in a car accident on Route 9 4 years earlier, and my grandfather, Frank Delaney, then 65, had quietly become the only steady adult left in my life. My Uncle Richard was Frank's only other child, 11 years older than my dad, and Richard's son Cole, my cousin, 2 years younger than me, was the one who got the birthday parties at the country club, the college fund, the seat next to Grandpa Frank at every single holiday table. I got a card in the mail if I was lucky. Usually late, usually signed only by Carol. That was the asymmetry nobody in the family said out loud. But everyone understood it anyway, the way you understand weather. I still remember one Saturday morning that same summer, sitting at Grandpa Frank's kitchen table on Larkspur Lane, the smell of percolating coffee and cut grass drifting through the screen door, while he taught me to balance his checkbook line by line, his reading glasses pushed down his nose. Numbers don't lie to you, Anna, he told me, tapping a chewed pencil against a column of figures. People do that. Numbers just tell you what actually happened. I didn't know it then, but that Saturday morning was the first day of the career that would eventually save him. By November of 2015, I was 23, working nights as a junior bookkeeper while finishing my accounting degree at Wright State, and Richard's restaurant, a steakhouse called the Kettle House in Fairborn, was $180,000 underwater. He drove out to my apartment on a Tuesday night with papers already drawn up, cologne too strong for the small living room, and asked me to co-sign a loan against Grandpa Frank's house on Larkspur Lane, using my clean credit and my grandfather's equity to bail him out before the bank called the note. I told him I'd look at the restaurant's numbers first, purely out of habit. 2 vendor invoices didn't match the deposit records. $22,000 was missing between what customers had paid and what actually hit the business account. I said no. One word. No, I won't co-sign. And no, I won't stay quiet about what I found sitting in these books. 3 weeks later, at Thanksgiving, the house on Larkspur Lane smelled like sage and burnt sugar. The good china was out, and Richard stood up before the pie was even served and told the whole table I tried to destroy his family over money I didn't understand. Carol said the line about not really being one of us. Grandpa Frank, 72 that year, sat at the head of the table with his hands flat against the tablecloth, and he said nothing. He didn't defend me, and he didn't defend Richard either. He just looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I folded my napkin, thanked Grandpa Frank quietly for the years he'd given me, and walked out into 19-degree cold without stopping to button my coat, and I never once looked back at that porch light. The woman who caught me that week was Diane Ashford, my night shift supervisor at the accounting firm, 51 years old, a widow with no children of her own and a corner office she rarely used because she preferred the floor with everyone else. She sat with me in a Denny's parking lot until almost 2 a.m., 2 cups of bad coffee going cold between us, and told me something I still repeat to myself on hard mornings. The truth doesn't need you to defend it right now. It just needs you to keep the receipts. I took that literally. That week, I started a folder, emails, texts, bank statements, the restaurant ledgers I'd photographed before Richard could shred them. I called it the Delaney file, and it grew, quietly, for 9 years. Diane became the person I called on every birthday my own family forgot. The one who sat in the second row when I received my CFE credential, and the reason I still keep a spare desk in my office with her name on a small brass plate, even though she retired to Sedona back in 2022. Year 1, I finished my degree with Diane's old laptop propped on a milk crate. Year 2, I passed my certified fraud examiner exam and moved to Denver with $1,900 in my checking account. Year 3, I made senior analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown. Year 4, I left to open Sterling Ledger Advisory out of a 400 square foot office above a laundromat on Colfax Avenue with $6,000 in savings and one client. Year 5, we landed our first six-figure retainer client, a regional construction company that needed its books untangled after an internal embezzlement scare. Year 6, we had 11 employees and a real lease on a proper suite with our name etched on frosted glass. Year 7, I testified as an expert witness in a civil fraud case for the first time and won. Year 8, the firm cleared 7 figures in annual revenue for the first time, and I finally repainted that milk crate office in my head as a story I could tell out loud instead of a wound I still carried. In 9 years, exactly one member of my family reached out, Richard, in March of 2019, a single text at 11:47 p.m. that read, "Heard you're doing well. Don't forget where you came from." I never replied. I saved the screenshot anyway. Then, on January 9th, 2025, at 6:52 p.m., Cole called me for the first time in 9 years. I almost didn't answer, but something about seeing his name on my screen after a decade made my thumb move before I decided anything. Grandpa Frank, now 81, had been diagnosed with moderate vascular dementia the previous September, and Richard had filed a guardianship petition in Montgomery County Probate Court, asking to be named Frank's legal and financial guardian. Cole sent me the filing because he said something about it felt wrong in his stomach, and he didn't know who else to trust with that feeling. What felt wrong became specific 4 days later, when Cole accidentally forwarded me a screenshot from a family group chat meant only for Richard and Carol. In it, timestamped January 17th at 9:14 p.m., Richard had written that once guardianship was approved, he planned to sell the lake house on Indian Lake, Grandpa Frank's house, appraised that same month at $340,000, and use the proceeds to finally clear the Kettle House's debt, which had grown, over 9 years, to $95,000. Frank's own wishes weren't mentioned once in 11 messages. Not once. I called an elder law attorney the next morning, a sharp, unhurried woman named Miriam Solis, who'd spent 18 years handling guardianship disputes across 3 counties. We met in her office on a Thursday afternoon, and I laid out everything I had across her conference table. The old restaurant ledgers from 2015, the group chat screenshot, 9 years of saved texts and emails, and a grandson's gut feeling that wouldn't leave him alone. Miriam read through the Delaney file for almost 40 minutes without saying a word, then looked up and said, "Most people walk in here with a feeling. You walked in here with a case." She filed to intervene in the guardianship proceeding within the week and requested, as standard practice, copies of any medical evaluations already on record for Frank. If this is hitting close to home for anyone watching right now, drop a comment because it happens far more often than people think, and it rarely looks like a movie villain. It usually looks like a tired man convinced he's the only one who can fix things. The morning of the hearing, I put on the same charcoal gray suit I wore to close our biggest client contract, packed the Delaney file into a single black folder, and sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage for 6 full minutes before I let myself go inside. I wasn't nervous about losing. I was nervous about what it would feel like to sit 12 feet from Richard and Carol for the first time in 9 years and say nothing at all, and simply let the paperwork speak for me. The hearing was set for March 3rd, 2025, 9 a.m., in a wood-paneled courtroom that still smelled faintly of floor polish before Judge Eleanor Voss. Richard testified first, in a navy suit that didn't quite fit him anymore, and told the court that in a private visit on January 14th, his father had told him, clearly and repeatedly, that he wanted Richard, not me, not anyone else, named as his guardian. He said it with one hand pressed flat over his heart, the same gesture I remembered from that Thanksgiving table. He said his father trusted him completely, that the family had simply drifted apart over misunderstandings, and that he only wanted to protect his father's home and his dignity. On cross-examination, Miriam asked him plainly whether any part of that January 14th conversation had been recorded, witnessed, or written down anywhere. Richard said no, that it had just been the two of them, father and son, alone in the sunroom. Miriam asked him what time the conversation happened. Around 3 in the afternoon, Richard said, adjusting his tie. Maybe a little after. Miriam simply nodded, wrote something down, and thanked him. Then Miriam called Dr. Aisha Bennett, Frank's geriatric physician for the past 6 years, to the stand. Dr. Bennett opened a laptop on the witness table and explained, in the calm, procedural voice of someone who has testified before, that on that exact date, January 14th, at 2:40 p.m., she had conducted a recorded cognitive and preference assessment with Frank, standard protocol whenever a guardianship filing involves one of her patients. She played 11 seconds of the recording. In a slow, unmistakably clear voice, my grandfather said he did not trust his son with his money, that Richard had asked him twice that month to sign papers he didn't understand, and that if anyone needed to handle his affairs, it should be his granddaughter, Anna. The recording was time-stamped 1 hour and 40 minutes before Richard had just sworn. Under oath, that conversation with his father even took place. The courtroom went quiet in a way I don't think I'll ever fully describe. Richard's face didn't go red with anger. It went pale, and for just a moment he looked like a much smaller man than the one who'd stood up at that Thanksgiving table 9 years earlier. I just needed it to be true, he said quietly, almost to himself, before catching himself and insisting his father was confused, that the dementia made him say things he didn't mean anymore. But you can pressure a signature. You can't pressure a diagnosis, and you cannot pressure a timestamp. I never took the stand to attack him. I didn't have to. Miriam simply entered the old restaurant ledgers and the group chat screenshot into the record, and let the paper do what 9 years of silence never could. Judge Voss denied Richard's petition, appointed a neutral professional fiduciary as Frank's guardian pending further review, and referred the financial questions to Ohio's Adult Protective Services for investigation. Not because I asked for punishment, but because the law required it once the facts were sitting on the table in front of her. Whatever came next for Richard would come from his own choices, not from anything I did to him. Outside the courthouse, on the cold marble steps, Cole found me before I reached my car. He didn't defend his father. He just said he was sorry it took him this long to see it clearly, and asked if there was any chance someday we could actually know each other again, the way cousins are supposed to, the way we used to be before any of this started. I told him the door wasn't locked. It never had been for him. Grandpa Frank still lives in the house on Larkspur Lane, under the professional fiduciary's oversight, with a part-time caregiver who visits for mornings a week, and a standing Sunday dinner with me that we never miss now. He doesn't remember every detail of that hearing, but he remembers my name every single time I walk through his door, and lately, that's enough. If there's one thing 9 years taught me, it's this. Silence isn't peace, and blood isn't proof of loyalty. Family is the people who show up when the truth is inconvenient, not the ones who disappear until there's money or property on the table. I spent 9 years being told I wasn't really one of them. It turns out I was just the one person in that family willing to keep the receipts, and the only one still standing in that courtroom whose story never had to change from one telling to the next. If this story meant something to you, subscribe for the next one, drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the truth keeps better records than any of us ever could. I'll see you in the next story.